Hello students, welcome to this video on Candide. Candide is a satirical novella by the French writer Voltaire. In this novella, he parodies religion and philosophy, especially the doctrine of optimism by Leibniz. This doctrine says that everything works for the best, all things happen for the best because of the presence of a benevolent God. Now, this novella has been translated into English and there are various titles. The most popular is Candide the Optimist. Voltaire is one of the most representative authors of modern European fiction. Candide is considered his greatest work. Voltaire believed in ideals of free and liberal society, and he was greatly inspired by Isaac Newton, John Locke, and Francis Bacon. He found inspiration in Enlightenment philosophers, along with freedom of religion and free commerce. He believed in a supreme being who remains untouchable and unknown, not by faith, but rather by reason. He favored religious tolerance, but he was severely critical towards Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. He was often imprisoned and exiled for many years by the French authorities for his politically and religiously charged works. Now, his other well known works include the tragic play Zaire and the historical study The Age of Louis XIV. Candide is filled with philosophical and religious parody, and in the end, we find that the characters reject optimism, a philosophy that was virulently attacked by Voltaire in this novella. Recognized as Voltaire's magnum opus, Candide, or The Optimist, is a French satire first published in 1759. This picaresque novel is characterized by its bitter, matter of fact tone and its erratic, fast moving plot, which parodies many adventure and romance stories. Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels is considered by some critics to be the precursor of Candide. A number of historical events also seem to have inspired Voltaire to write Candide. So, in this novella, Voltaire critiques blind faith that often leads to meaningless devastation in the name of religion. This is a subversive work written against a backdrop of aimless religious persecution and war. The novella has great contemporary relevance. Now, let's take a look at the historical background. So, this includes the publication of Gottfried Leibniz's doctrine of optimism in his work Monadology. This is a short metaphysical treatise. And his doctrine can be summarized in the aphorism everything is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. The 7 Years' War is also mentioned, and the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, which according to Voltaire was grossly exaggerated by the media of that time. So Candide contended with the problem of evil directly and humorously, like the philosophers of Voltaire's time. Voltaire ridicules religion, theologians, governments, armies, philosophies, and the philosophers of his age. Through the character of Candide, Voltaire attacked Leibniz and his contemporary doctrine of optimism, a philosophy which implies that all things happen for the best because God is a benevolent God. What are Voltaire's concerns in Candide? These are the two basic questions that he asks. Where is the order in this world? Even nature is wreaking havoc on society. So, how can we believe in the goodness of God? Again, he asks, how can religious fanatics and power hungry, hypocritical despots save the world? So, we see these questions being pondered over by the protagonist Candide in this novella. The novella has 30 chapters, and for the sake of convenience, I have divided it into three parts of 10 chapters each. So, the protagonist of Candide is, the title is itself the name of the character, the protagonist, Candide, and he is a naive, a simpleton who lives in Westphalia. It is a place which is ruled by the mighty Baron of Thunder Ten Tronk. So when the plot begins, we find Candide living in this castle at Westphalia, and the Baron has a lovely young daughter named Cunigund. The name Candide reflects his simple character and lack of wise judgment. Dr. Pangloss is the tutor of Candide and Cunigund. He is respected as a profound and an erudite philosopher. Pangloss is a Greek name which means all tongues. Pangloss firmly believed and taught Candide and Cunigund that everything in the world was essentially for the best end. Whatever happened is good because this is the best of all possible worlds. So, this reflects the main target of Voltaire's satire, which is Leibniz's optimistic philosophy that everything in life happens for the best. Now, the significant incident in the first chapter is Candide and Cunigund discovering Dr. Pangloss's illicit relationship with a chambermaid named Paquette. So, Cunigund was so inspired by the relationship between Dr. Pangloss and the maid, and so she encourages Candide also to experiment in this game of love. Unfortunately, they are discovered by the Baron, the father of Cunigund, who immediately exiles Candide. So the unlucky Candide was banished from the castle and exiled from his best of all possible worlds, that was Westphalia. So in the following chapters, we understand Candide wanders around. He was miserable. He was tired and starving, and he reaches a neighboring town where he is forced to join the war as a Bulgarian soldier. And Voltaire describes in detail the horrors of war. Candide was beaten cruelly, he was whipped, he was flogged because he dared to run away from the army. And Voltaire describes the glories of war, the well drilled troops, the martial music, the heroic butchery. Uh, all this was new to Candide and he was horrified. So we are introduced to another character named the Anabaptist, which means a man who has not been baptized. But though the Anabaptist is not a believer, he is very compassionate towards his fellow beings. And on their journey, he again meets Dr. Pangloss, but he is now a beggar with lifeless eyes and a body covered with sores. His mouth was twisted and he was pained by a violent cough. And this deceased, pathetic beggar, who was his former mentor and exponent of optimism, still believes in his philosophy that this is the best of all possible worlds. So, Pangloss has a very depressing report of what had happened in Westphalia. He got the disease from the chambermaid Paquette, and the place was attacked by Bulgarian soldiers, and he reports that Cunigund, Candidate's Candide's lover, was dead after being repeatedly raped and mutilated by the Bulgarian soldiers. He also describes to Candide that the soldiers had cut her to pieces. They smashed the head of the baron, killed his wife and son, and destroyed everything. So the novella moves on. Now they travel to Lisbon, and on the way, unfortunately, the ship is wrecked and everyone drowns. The Anabaptist actually drowns because he tried to save another person. And strange enough, for Pangloss, for Dr. Pangloss, everything continued to be for the best. Now, when the ship was wrecked and everyone drowned, only three people were left. Only three people survived. A cruel sailor who was saved by the Anabaptist, Candide, and Pangloss. Now, in Lisbon, they experienced a massive earthquake in which thousands of people died and the whole city was destroyed. Candide was almost sure that the end of the world had come. Meanwhile, the cruel sailor who was saved along with them was busy looking for money. He was getting drunk. He was enjoying the favors of girls among the ruins of the city. Now, the wise men in Portugal, especially the scholars at the University of Coimbra, stated that the only option to save the city from total destruction uh, was to kill selected criminals, and three people were selected. Uh, uh, two uh, Two Portuguese were accused of being Jews and therefore enemies of Christianity. Pangloss and Candide were also found guilty of serious crimes. So Pangloss was hanged and Candide was whipped. But on the same day, another terrible earthquake occurred, and Candide manages to escape with the help of an old woman. So this old woman takes him to a hut. She applied medicine on his wounds and arranged a bed for him to sleep. And later, she takes him to a remote country house surrounded by gardens and canals. Candide followed her up a hidden staircase, and there he is reunited with Cunegonde. He is totally shocked. He is surprised at seeing her. Both of them fainted, but they were revived by the old woman who left them alone. And both they exchange their stories. So Cunegonde tells Candide how she escaped from the Bulgarian soldiers, and Candide also tells about his experiences, his journeys, and so on. So, Cunegonde refers to a person named uh, Don Issachar, a wealthy Jew, a man who traded in Holland and Portugal. And though he saved her, he actually wanted to only possess her. So while staying with this Don Issachar, the Jew, she attended Mass in church one day, and the Grand Inquisitor saw her and was attracted to her. So there was a conflict between these two people, both of them very influential people in society. And Cunegonde succeeded in resisting both men. And Cunegonde explained that it was to prevent the earthquakes and to frighten Don Issachar that the Inquisitor had decided to conduct the killings. Okay, so we find that Candide kills the two men who were attracted to Cunegonde, the Grand Inquisitor and Don Issachar. And the old woman advised them to escape. So the three of them tried to escape. Cunegonde had money and jewels to cover the journey expenses, which she had taken from those two men, from the Don Issachar. Now, the next few chapters, chapters 11 and 12, narrate the voyage of Cunegonde and Candide along with the old woman to the new world. The optimistic Candide still believe that in the new world they will find that everything has happened for the best. But Cunegonde is now a pessimist, is a pessimist. She recalled her past and she remained doubtful. And they listened to the story of the old woman who was actually the daughter of a pope and the princess of Palestrina. Until the age of 14, she had lived in a magnificent castle, but then a series of unfortunate events happened to her. She undergoes through very horrific experiences, and she is saved by the honest eunuch who also sells her to a merchant and so on. So this is the story of the old woman, and the chapters 13 to 16 are interesting because Voltaire describes two different utopian states in these chapters. Now, Cunegonde, Candide, and the old woman arrive at Buenos Aires, and unfortunately, the governor is attracted by the beautiful Cunegonde and he desires to marry her. So Candide was alarmed and he tried to, convince the governor that he was engaged to Cunegonde and they were about to be married, but the governor would not listen to him. And so again, the young lady asks the old woman for advice, and the old woman tells her it would be practical to marry the governor instead of uh, Candide. So Candide is forced to run away from there, and he is helped by a very devoted servant named Cacambo. Cacambo is from Spain, a man of mixed blood and wide experiences. He had various experiences as a choir boy, a sexton, a monk, a merchant's agent, a soldier, a footman, and so on. So when he learned of Candide's predicament, Cacambo quickly saddled two horses and urged Candide to flee. So he also persuaded Candide to believe that the women will be fine. God looked after them. And so they go on and they meet a Jesuit leader who turns out to be the brother of Cunegonde. Again, he was supposed to have been killed by the Bulgarian soldiers, according to Dr. Pangloss's report. So they are in Paraguay now, and again, unfortunately, this Jesuit commander, the brother of Cunegonde, refused to let a commoner like Candide marry his sister. So they have an argument, and he is killed by Candide. So again, they have to run away from there, and this is Candide's third murder. So they run away from there, and they meet two naked girls who are chased by monkeys, and they are captured by a tribe called the Aurelian tribe, a tribe that was unpolluted by Western civilization. So Voltaire describes Candide's encounter with the Aurelians. So, in these chapters from 11 to 15 or so on, that we just listened to, Voltaire describes his utopias or ideal states. The first utopia is the Jesuit utopia in Paraguay, where the religious leaders had established a kind of theocratic tyranny, which is a government run by the religious people or by the church. But it is actually a counter utopia because it could be a utopia or an ideal state only if one were a Jesuit in that country. Now, the other utopia is the world of the Aurelian tribe. They existed in a pure state of nature, unpolluted by man made Western civilization. Now, the Aurelian tribe, they send them away, and Candide is preparing to go back to Europe to be reunited with Cunegonde. They travel for days and eventually arrive in a beautiful place, El Dorado. So, this is another utopian land that Voltaire describes. This was a land of science and tolerance where there was abundant gold, and all were priests. So, the experiences in El Dorado change or transform Candide and Cacambo. They learned a great deal about the form of government, about the women in El Dorado, about the arts. The people of El Dorado worshipped only one God, but they did not pray to him because they had everything they needed. They sang only hymns or songs of thanksgiving. There were no priests, all were priests. They did not have monks. So Candide was in total ecstasy, for he had heard of nothing like this in Westphalia or elsewhere in Europe. So, what happens next is that Candide and Cacambo leave El Dorado with enough riches to be reunited with Cunegonde, but unfortunately, again, more sad incidents follow. So, his newly acquired wealth is stolen. He sets sail for Europe. Along the way, he manages to get some riches from a sunken Spanish ship. So we find that in all these chapters, Voltaire continues his savage satirical attack upon the philosophy of optimism. And this philosophy denies that natural disasters and all kinds of sufferings were only part of a cosmic plan from which good ultimately emerged. So, in the last section, again, we find that Voltaire continues the satire on religion. So Candide meets another scholarly man, Martin. They have very fruitful discussions. They talked about moral and physical evil, about sufferings, and so on. In Paris, again, his riches are stolen, and he understands that Cunegonde is in Constantinople, where he meets Dr. Pangloss again. So, in the first few chapters, we Voltaire had told us that Pangloss was hanged after the Lisbon earthquake by the Grand Inquisitor, but he managed to escape. He has managed to escape, and so Pangloss is reunited with Cunegonde and Candide, and Dr. Pangloss is still under the I mean, he's still convinced. He still affirms that everything that happens is only for the best. So Candide purchases Cunegonde's freedom and finds that she has grown old and ugly. So he doesn't really want to marry her, but they are married and they move into a farmhouse together. But soon Candide grows bored of this life and he meets a man, a farmer, a Turk, who is happy because he works all day. And this farmer is so tired at night that he hasn't any time left for philosophical speculation. So Candide also decides to lead a very simple and a pastoral life filled with work and no evil. And the novella ends with the famous Epicurean motto, "We must cultivate our own garden." So, in the last three chapters, especially from 27 to 30, Voltaire has managed to bring together the important characters and to provide a good conclusion. Now, throughout the novel, the emphasis was on humanity's senselessness, intolerance, cruelty, and greed. Martin was his mentor, the scholar whom he met, and Candide concludes that the only way to have or to find happiness in life is to work without reason. So, Dr. Pangloss occasionally repeated his principle, his philosophy of optimism that all events were linked together logically in this best of all possible worlds. And he argued that if Candide had not been banished from the splendid castle in Westphalia, he would not, have experienced so much in life and so on. So we find that in the end, Candide responds saying that it is a good philosophy, but at the same time, they must cultivate their garden in order to lead a good life. So these are some of the main characters that you come across in Candide. Candide, Cunegonde, his lover, later became, at the end of the novel, she becomes his wife. Dr. Pangloss, a very learned man, a scholar, who believes in the Leibnizian philosophy of optimism. The Anabaptist, a good man, but he was not religious, he was not baptized, but he was very helpful, very generous, and very compassionate. The old woman who had saved Candide and Cunegonde, Don Issachar, and the Grand Inquisitor, two people, two religious leaders who unfortunately were not good role models. Then the governor of Buenos Aires, who was struck by the beauty of Cunegonde and who wanted to marry her, Don Fernando. Cacambo, Candide's man Friday, the faithful friend. Martin, the elderly scholar whom Candide meets towards the end of the novella. And Paquet, the chambermaid whom we see in the beginning of the novella. Now, the essay that is most frequently asked from this novella is Candide as a satire. The dictionary defines satire as any literary work holding up human vices and follies to ridicule or to scorn. So, Voltaire in Candide also uses satire as a powerful literary tool, mainly for a vibrant and a sarcastic portrayal of the Enlightenment philosophy of optimism. So the Leibnizian philosophy of optimism was used to hide superstition, sexually transmitted diseases, the tyranny of the king and the church, civil and religious wars, the cruel punishment of innocent civilians, and so on. So in this novella, Candide, Voltaire uses satire as a means of conveying his opinions about many aspects of European society in the 18th century. The novel depicts the adventures of the young Candide, a very naive young man, banished from his sheltered paradise, the castle at Westphalia. The travels that Candide makes, the experiences, his sufferings, and his hardship. So everything transforms him from the naive person that he was in the beginning. Now, satire on religion. So, Candide is a satire on religion. So, religious leaders and all forms of organized religion are the targets of satire. According to Voltaire, religion is only a tool of power that men use. So, he exposes the clergy as greedy, hypocritical, and cruel. Voltaire portrays the horrors of religious persecution and superstitious beliefs. Candide encounters Christians, Jews, and Muslims on his travels, but he finds that they all use religion to justify their criminal activities. So Voltaire mocks the foolish belief of human beings in a benevolent God. Many religions believe in a benevolent God who has a higher purpose for things that happen. Now, Candide, however, sees a lot of horrors in the world that he gradually understands, or he concludes that it is foolish in believing the existence of a benevolent God. So, Voltaire uses many characters to expose the hypocritical and foolish religious leaders. There is a friar, a priest who steals, a monk who buys a prostitute, a Jew who buys a woman for sexual favors. Voltaire attacks the corruption within the church, within the officials. The Grand Inquisitor, a significant clergyman, makes Cunegonde his mistress after he sees her during a mass in church. Then he is willing to share her with a Jew, a Franciscan priest, robbed Cunegonde of her money and jewels. The old woman, she identified herself as the illegitimate daughter of a pope. So these are all different characters through which Voltaire satirizes religion. So Candide is also a satire on politics and society. So in this, Voltaire criticizes war and violence in society. The satire also reveals inconsistencies in politics and the deceitful nature and incompetence of rulers. He attacks the excessive pride and vanity of those in power. For example, the governor of Buenos Aires, Don Fernando, he is a good example of how people in power abuse their position. The suffering of various people whom Candide meets in his travels highlights uh, how politics manipulate or how politicians manipulate the civilians. Voltaire's satirical representations of war are a reaction to the bloodshed caused by the horrible wars in Europe, the 18th century wars in Europe. Candide's military training with the Bulgarians, the description of battles with the battleground strewn with brains, severed arms, and legs, demonstrates the casualties of wars. The novella can also be seen as a satire on the philosophy of optimism. The subtitle of Candide, which has been translated in many different versions, is "All for the Best," or the most famous subtitle is "The Optimist." In some translations, you find the subtitle as "Optimism." So Voltaire satirizes the Leibnizian optimism advocated by the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment. Candide first learns about this philosophy of optimism, from his tutor and mentor, Dr. Pangloss. The core of Pangloss's philosophy is that since everything was made for a purpose, everything is necessarily for the best purpose. Now, we find that Dr. Pangloss holds on to this philosophy till the end of the novella. Candide begins to doubt optimism after witnessing, all those horrific incidents, his experience as a Bulgarian soldier, the great earthquake at Lisbon, the Grand Inquisitor, how he was whipped, Dr. Pangloss was hanged. So all this makes him doubt this philosophy of optimism. And we find Candide often reflecting, if this is the best of all possible worlds, what are the others like? So Voltaire proves the absurdity of this philosophy through the various misfortunes and horrors encountered by Candide. So he travels the world, and everywhere he finds cruelty, greed. So he is forced to forsake his optimism to live in contentment by cultivating his garden and finding happiness in work. Towards the end of Candide, we find Dr. Pangloss, repeating this belief that all events are connected in the best of all possible worlds. And Candide understands, or he realizes, that he is happy not because the best of all possible worlds has finally brought good out of evil, but because he has made his own happiness. These are some of the references that I have used to prepare this video lecture. I hope this video lecture has been useful to you. Thank you so much for your patient listening.